Lorelei staged a car accident on Silver Peak during my birthday trip, leaving me with nothing but a thin coat. I was about to light a fire for warmth when a local homeless woman stopped me, warning that the smoke would only signal my family to return and finish the job. Terrified, I realized that 30 degrees below zero was not my biggest enemy tonight. My name is Kimberly Wainwright, and for my 18th birthday, my family gave me a one-way ticket to hell disguised as a winter getaway. The interior of the Range Rover smelled of expensive leather, Lorelei's cloying Chanel No. 5 perfume, and the faint, stinging undertone of the gin my father, Harrison, had been sipping from a silver flask since we left the city limits. Outside the tinted windows, the North Dakota landscape was a blur of aggressive whiteness. The snow wasn't falling gently. It was being driven horizontally by a wind that looked strong enough to strip paint from steel. I shifted in my seat, pulling my cashmere cardigan tighter around my chest. The digital clock on the dashboard read 2:30 in the afternoon. But the sky was already the color of a bruised plum, dark and heavy with the promise of violence. "Stop fidgeting, Kimberly," Lorelei said from the driver's seat. She didn't look at me in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were fixed on the treacherous road ahead, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. Even in this weather, her makeup was flawless, a mask of foundation and powder that hid the 45 years of scheming etched into her face. "You are making Harrison nervous." My father didn't look nervous. He looked defeated. He was staring out the passenger window at the passing tree line, his eyes glassy and unfocused. He hadn't spoken a word to me in 4 hours. Not a happy birthday, not a "how are you holding up?" Just silence and the rhythmic clink-clink of his wedding ring tapping against the flask. "I'm not the one making him nervous, Lorelei," I replied, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "I think the blizzard warning on the radio is doing that." Next to me in the back seat, my stepbrother Pierce let out a short, sharp laugh. He was 21, handsome in a way that would have been charming if his eyes weren't constantly scanning the room for something to break or someone to use. He was tapping furiously on his phone, the blue light illuminating his sharp features. "It is not just a blizzard, little sister," Pierce said, shoving his phone screen toward my face. "It is a bomb cyclone. They are calling it a historic freeze. Temperatures are expected to drop to 30 below zero tonight with the wind chill. Isn't that exciting?" There was a hunger in his voice that made my stomach turn. Pierce loved chaos. He loved destruction. Seeing a storm like this didn't scare him. It aroused him. "We should turn back," I said, leaning forward between the front seats. "Dad, look at the snow. We are miles from the nearest town. If we get stuck out here—" "We are not turning back," Lorelei cut in, her voice sharp as a whip crack. "We are going to the lodge at Silver Peak. We booked this months ago. It is a celebration, a family bonding trip. We need this, Kimberly, before the transition." The transition. That was the polite word she used for the moment the clock struck 12 tonight. At midnight, I would legally become the sole trustee of the Wainwright pharmaceutical fortune. An inheritance left to me by my grandfather, bypassing my father entirely. $500 million. That was the only reason I had agreed to come. Lorelei had framed it as a peace offering. Let us spend one last weekend as a normal family before the lawyers and the board meetings take over your life. She had said, "Let us bury the hatchet." I looked at the back of my father's head. "Dad?" Harrison flinched, but he didn't turn around. He took another long pull from his flask. "Listen to your mother, Kimmy. She knows best." He wasn't my mother. My mother was a gentle woman who loved playing the piano and smelled of lavender, and who had died of a sudden, unexplained heart failure when I was 10. Lorelei was the secretary who had moved into the master bedroom 3 months later. The car swerved slightly as a gust of wind slammed into the side, but Lorelei corrected it with terrifying precision. We were climbing elevation now, heading deeper into the isolated wilderness of Silver Peak. The trees were becoming denser, tall pines heavily laden with snow that looked like hunched, frozen giants watching us pass. "Here," Pierce said, thrusting a silver thermos into my hands. "Mom made her special herbal tea. Drink up. You look pale. I looked at the thermos. I was thirsty. The heating in the car was cranked up so high that the air felt dry and suffocating. I'm fine. Don't be ungrateful, Lorelei snapped from the front. I brewed that with ginger and honey specifically for your throat. You know how you get sick when the weather changes. Just drink it, Kimberly, Harrison mumbled, his voice thick with alcohol. Please, just keep the peace. I sighed and unscrewed the cap. Steam curled up, carrying the scent of ginger and something else, something bitter and earthy that I couldn't place. I took a small sip. It was hot, scalding my tongue, but the sweetness masked the odd aftertaste. Finish it, Pierce urged, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. It will warm you up. I drank half of it, just to stop them from staring at me, then screwed the cap back on. Happy? Pierce smiled, a slow spreading of lips that didn't reach his eyes. Ecstatic. 10 minutes later, the world began to tilt. At first, I thought it was the car navigating a sharp curve, but then the curve straightened out, and the horizon kept tilting. A heaviness settled into my limbs, as if my blood had turned to liquid lead. My eyelids felt like they weighed 50 pounds each. Dad? I slurred. My tongue felt too big for my mouth. I don't feel good. Almost there, Lorelei said. Her voice sounded distant, like she was speaking from underwater. Stop the car, I whispered, clutching my stomach. A wave of nausea rolled over me, followed by a terrifying numbness in my fingers. I think I'm going to be sick. She's going to throw up on the leather, Pierce said, his voice devoid of concern. Pull over, Mom. We can't have the heiress ruining the upholstery. The car slowed down. The crunch of tires on gravel and ice was deafening in the sudden silence of the cabin. Lorelei pulled the vehicle off the main road onto a narrow logging trail that cut between two dense patches of forest. The trees here were so thick they blocked out the remaining gray light of the afternoon, casting everything in a premature twilight. Why are we here? I managed to ask. My head lolled against the cold window glass. I tried to lift my hand to open the door, but my arm wouldn't obey. It flopped uselessly onto the seat. Checking the tires, Lorelei announced. She put the car in park, but kept the engine running. Pierce, help your sister get some fresh air. With pleasure, Pierce said. The back door opened. A blast of freezing air hit me, momentarily sharpening my senses. The wind howled like a dying animal. Snowflakes stung my face, melting instantly on my feverish skin. Come on, princess, Pierce said. He reached in, grabbing me by the arm. His grip was bruising. Wait, I gasped. I can't walk. I know, he whispered, leaning close to my ear. That is the point. He yanked me. I tumbled out of the car, my legs buckling underneath me. I hit the hard-packed snow with a thud that knocked the wind out of my lungs. I tried to scream, but only a pathetic whimper came out. My body was shutting down. The sedative was fast-acting and potent. Pierce didn't help me up. Instead, he grabbed the collar of my coat and began dragging me. I looked back at the car. Harrison had opened his door and stepped out. He was standing there in his expensive wool coat, swaying slightly in the wind. He looked at me, dragged through the snow like a sack of garbage by his stepson, and his face crumbled. Lorelei, Harrison pleaded, his voice cracking. Lorelei, we can't do this. Not this. She's my daughter. Lorelei stepped out of the driver's side. She stood tall against the blizzard, her hair whipping around her face like Medusa's snakes. She walked over to Harrison and placed a gloved hand on his chest. We have discussed this, Harrison, she said calmly, shouting over the wind. Do you want to lose the house? Do you want the board to find out about the $3 million you embezzled to pay off your gambling debts in Vegas? Do you want to go to federal prison and rot there? Harrison looked at her, then at me. I was 20 feet away now, Pierce dragging me toward the edge of the clearing where the ground dropped off into a ravine. Dad, I stretched out a hand. My fingers were already numb. She won't feel a thing, Lorelei promised him. It is painless. She falls asleep in the cold. It is a tragedy, a terrible accident. She wandered off in the storm. We looked for her, but the visibility was zero. Harrison closed his eyes. A single tear tracked through the broken veins on his cheek. Then, he turned his back on me and got back into the car. The sound of the door slamming shut was louder than the storm. Pierce dragged me to the edge. Below us, a slope tumbled down into darkness, covered in jagged rocks and deep drifts. It wasn't a sheer cliff, but it was steep enough that once I was down there, in this condition, I would never climb back up. "Happy birthday, sis," Pierce said. He crouched down, searching my pockets. He took my phone. He took my wallet. "You won't be needing these where you are going." He stood up and kicked me, not hard, just enough to break my precarious hold on the edge. I rolled. The world became a violent kaleidoscope of white snow, black rock, and gray sky. I tumbled down the slope, my body slamming against tree roots and hidden stones. I felt a rib crack, a sharp, hot flare of pain that cut through the drug's haze. I kept rolling, gathering speed, until I slammed into a snowbank at the bottom of the ravine. Silence. No. I forced my eyes open. Above me, far up the slope, I saw the twin red beams of taillights. They didn't linger. They didn't hesitate. The car reversed, turned around, and drove away, disappearing into the swirling white void. They had left me. My father, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, the man who used to read me bedtime stories before the alcohol drowned him, he had left me to die in a blizzard. Panic surged through me, fighting the sedative. I tried to sit up, but my body felt disconnected from my brain. I was wearing only a thin cashmere cardigan, a silk blouse, and dress pants. I had lost one boot in the fall. The cold was a physical weight, pressing down on me, 30 degrees below zero. That was what Pierce had said. At that temperature, frostbite would set in within 10 minutes on exposed skin. Hypothermia would follow shortly after. I looked around. I was in a shallow ravine, hidden from the road by the dense tree line. The snow was piling up fast, burying my legs. This isn't an accident, my mind screamed, the clarity of terror cutting through the fog. This is a murder. They didn't just abandon me. They orchestrated this. The trip, the route, the stop, the tea. It was all a script, and I had played my part perfectly. I tried to crawl, digging my fingers into the frozen earth beneath the snow. Pain shot up my arm, but I welcomed it. Pain meant I was still alive. Pain meant I could still fight. "You have to move, Kimberly," I whispered to myself, my teeth chattering so hard I bit my tongue. "Move or die." But the drug was too strong. My vision blurred again. The white snow began to darken at the edges. I slumped forward, my cheek resting against the ice. I was 18 years old. I was the heir to an empire. And I was going to die here, alone, buried under 6 feet of snow while my family ordered room service at the Silver Peak Lodge and practiced their fake tears for the press conference. The wind howled louder, sounding like a chorus of screaming voices. Or maybe that was just the sound of my own heart breaking. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me completely was the uncaring gray sky and the first heavy flakes of the storm of the century burying me alive. I clawed my way up the slope, my fingernails packed with ice and dirt, but the mountain did not care about my desperation. The drug Pierce had spiked my drink with was beginning to recede, leaving behind a jagged, throbbing clarity that was infinitely worse than the haze. Every nerve ending in my body was screaming. My right foot, the one missing the boot, was a block of unfeeling wood. I could not wiggle my toes. I could not even feel where the ankle ended and the foot began. I reached for a gnarled root protruding from the snowbank, dragging my weight upward. I needed to get back to the road. If I could get to the road, maybe a passing truck would see me. Maybe a plow driver would spot the girl in the cashmere cardigan dying by the roadside. But when I finally hauled myself over the lip of the ravine, collapsing face first into a snowdrift, the road was gone. In the short time since the Range Rover had driven away, the blizzard had erased everything. The tire tracks were obliterated. The asphalt was buried under 6 inches of fresh powder. The world was a featureless void of white, churning violence. There was no north, no south, no up, no down. There was only the wind. It sounded like a freight train screaming through a tunnel, a physical force that battered my ribs and sucked the breath from my lungs before I could even inhale. I tried to stand, but the wind knocked me back down instantly. I crawled instead. Time became fluid. I did not know if I had been crawling for 10 minutes or 2 hours. The cold began to do strange things to my mind. The shivering, which had been so violent it nearly cracked my teeth, suddenly stopped. A dangerous warmth bloomed in my chest. It felt like sinking into a hot bath. "You are hot," a voice whispered in my ear. It sounded like my mother. "Take off your coat, Kimberly. It is too hot here." My fingers fumbled with the buttons of my cardigan. I wanted to tear it off. I wanted to lie down in the soft, inviting snow and sleep. The snow looked like pillows. It looked like the feather duvet on my bed back at the estate. "Just sleep," the voice cooed. "Harrison will wake you up for school." "No," I croaked. The sound was barely audible over the gale. "Not sleep." I bit the inside of my cheek. Hard. The metallic taste of blood and the sharp flare of pain anchored me back to reality. The warmth was a lie. It was the final stage of hypothermia. If I stopped shivering, I would die. I forced myself to look up. Through the swirling white curtain, I saw a shape, rectangular, artificial. It was not a tree or a rock. It stood about 50 yards away, a dark blotch against the gray twilight. I dragged myself toward it, my frozen limbs moving like rusty machinery. As I got closer, the shape resolved into a small, dilapidated structure. It was an old Ranger lookout station, likely abandoned for decades. The roof was sagging, and the windows were boarded up with rotting plywood, but it had 4 walls. It was a shelter. I reached the door and threw my shoulder against it. It was frozen shut. I screamed in frustration, a raw, animalistic sound, and slammed my body against the wood again and again. On the 3rd try, the rusted hinges gave way with a screech, and I tumbled inside onto a floor covered in dead leaves and snowdrifts. I kicked the door shut behind me and collapsed. The air inside was stagnant and smelled of mold and rodent droppings, but it was out of the wind. The silence was sudden and deafening. I lay there for a moment, gasping, waiting for the feeling to return to my extremities. It did not. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. In the corner of the single room, there was a stone fireplace. Next to it lay a pile of old, dry furniture, broken chairs, a table leg, left behind by vandals or previous squatters. Fire, I needed fire. I crawled toward the hearth. My hands were useless claws, but I managed to drag a few pieces of splintered wood into a pile. I patted my pockets frantically, forgetting for a second that Pierce had stripped me of everything. No phone, no lighter. But this was a ranger station. There had to be something. I scanned the room wildly. On a dusty shelf above the fireplace, I saw a small, red tin box. I stood up on shaky legs, grabbing the mantel for support, and reached for it. My frozen fingers fumbled, and the box fell to the floor, spilling its contents. Matches, waterproof storm matches, dozens of them scattered across the floorboards. I fell to my knees, sobbing with relief. I gathered a handful, my dexterity gone. I tried to strike one against the side of the box, but my thumb would not cooperate. I tried again, holding the match between my palms like a prayer. Scritch. A spark, then a flame. A beautiful orange tongue of heat flared to life. I leaned forward, shielding the fragile flame with my body, bringing it closer to the dry moss and wood shavings I had gathered in the fireplace. The kindling began to smoke. "Do it," I whispered. "Burn." Suddenly, the shadows in the corner of the room detached themselves from the wall. A hand, rough as sandpaper and strong as a vice, shot out of the darkness and clamped over my wrist. I gasped, dropping the match. It sizzled out on the damp floor. "Do not light that fire, little girl," a voice rasped. It sounded like gravel grinding together. low and ruined by years of smoke and shouting. "Unless you want to invite the Reaper to dinner." I scrambled back, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Who is there? Stay away from me!" A figure stepped into the sliver of light coming through the cracks in the boarded windows. It was a woman, though she looked more like a creature born of the forest itself. She was wrapped in layers of filthy, mismatched coats, her legs bound in rags and duct tape. Her hair was a tangled mane of steel gray, matted with twigs and dirt. Her face was a map of deep crevices, leathery and weather-beaten, but her eyes, one milky white with a cataract, the other a piercing, intelligent blue, were locked onto mine. I knew her. Everyone in the town at the base of Silver Peak knew her. They called her Old Verity, the crazy woman who shouted at traffic lights, the Witch of the Mountain. "Please," I stammered, backing up until my spine hit the cold wall. "I have no money. I have nothing. My family left me." "I know," Verity said. She did not move toward me, but she did not back down either. She stomped on the smoking kindling with a heavy, military-grade boot, extinguishing the last hope of warmth. "They did not just leave you, they are hunting you." "What?" "Two-legged wolves," she spat, pointing a gnarled finger toward the ceiling. "Listen." I strained my ears. Above the howling of the wind outside, I heard a different sound. It was a high-pitched, mechanical whine. Whirr, whirr. It sounded like an oversized mosquito buzzing angrily. Verity moved with surprising speed for someone who looked like a walking corpse. She grabbed my arm and dragged me to a crack in the boarded window. "Look," she commanded. "Up there, near the tree line." I squinted into the storm. At first, I saw nothing. Then, a tiny red light blinked in the darkness. A black shape, sleek and predatory, hovered against the gray sky. It dipped and weaved, fighting the gale with unnatural stability. A drone. "Thermal imaging," Verity whispered, her breath smelling of peppermint and rot. "They are scanning for heat signatures. You light that fire. You light up on their screen like a Christmas tree. 5 minutes later, someone comes up here with a silenced pistol to finish what the cold started." My blood ran cold, colder than the blizzard. Pierce. My stepbrother was obsessed with technology. He spent thousands on high-end drones. He used them to spy on neighbors, to harass wildlife. I remembered the gleam in his eyes when he talked about the storm. This was a game to him. He was not just leaving me to die. He was watching it happen. He wanted to see my body heat fade to blue on his screen while he sat comfortably in the lodge, sipping brandy. "How do you know this?" I asked, looking at the homeless woman with new terror. "How do you know about thermal imaging?" Verity ignored the question. "We have to move. They saw your heat signature when you entered the building. They will be coming to check. If we stay here, we die." "I can't walk," I sobbed. "My foot, I can't feel it." "Then crawl," Verity said mercilessly, "or stay here and be an ice sculpture. Your choice." She walked to the back of the room, where a heavy, rotting cupboard stood against the wall, with a grunt of effort that corded the muscles in her neck. She shoved it aside. Behind it, a section of the floorboards had been pried up, revealing a dark, earthy hole. "Into the rabbit hole," she said, gesturing. "I am not going down there," I said, shaking my head. The drone outside buzzed louder, closer. It was right above the roof now. Verity looked at me. "Suit yourself, princess." She swung her legs into the hole. I looked at the ceiling, imagining Pierce's smirk as he piloted the machine. Then I looked at the dark hole. I dragged myself across the floor and followed the mad woman into the earth. It wasn't just a hole, it was a tunnel. It was tight, smelling of frozen dirt and pine roots. I had to crawl on my hands and knees. Verity moved ahead of me, surprisingly agile. "Keep your head down," she called back. "I dug these tunnels over 3 winters. Keeps me out of the wind. Keeps me off the radar." We crawled for what felt like a lifetime. The tunnel was a nightmare of claustrophobia. Ice crystals coated the dirt walls, scraping my skin. My frozen foot dragged uselessly behind me. A dead weight. I wanted to stop. I wanted to cry, but the fear of Pierce and his drone pushed me forward. Finally, the tunnel widened. We emerged into a cavernous space. The air here was different, still cold, but dry and filtered. The walls were not dirt, but reinforced concrete. Verity fumbled in the darkness. There was a click, and the harsh white light of an LED lantern flooded the space. We were in a bunker. It looked like a relic from the Cold War. Metal shelves lined the walls, stacked with cans of beans, peaches, and Spam. There were heavy wool blankets, jugs of water, and a strange assortment of electronic equipment that looked completely out of place: radio scanners, monitors, and stacks of notebooks. "Welcome to the Hilton," Verity grunted. She helped me up, her touch rough but efficient. She guided me to a cot in the corner and threw a heavy thermal blanket over me. "Boots off," she ordered. She knelt and began to unlace my remaining boots. Then she took my frozen foot in her hands. Her hands were warm, impossibly warm. "Don't scream," she warned. She began to massage the blood back into my frost-bitten foot. The pain was immediate and blinding. It felt like my toes were being crushed in a vise and set on fire at the same time. I screamed, arching my back off the cot, tears streaming down my face. "Good," Verity said, not looking up. "Pain is good. Pain means the nerves are still alive. If you felt nothing, I would have to cut it off with a hacksaw." She worked on my feet for an hour, forcing me to drink lukewarm broth from a tin cup. Slowly, the agony subsided into a dull, throbbing ache. The shivering stopped, replaced by a genuine warmth. I sat up, wrapping the blanket tighter around me. I looked at Verity. She was sitting at a metal table, dismantling a radio receiver with a screwdriver. She looked nothing like the crazy witch the town described. There was a focus in her eyes, a sharpness that was terrifying. "Why?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Why did you save me? Why do you have this place?" Verity didn't look up from her work. "I didn't save you because I like you. Kimberly Wainwright. I saved you because I hate them." I froze. "You know who I am." "I know everything about you," Verity said. She put down the screwdriver and looked at me. "I know that your favorite color is blue. I know you play the cello, but you hate it. I know your father has been embezzling from the company for 5 years. And I know why Lorelei decided to kill you tonight. She wants the inheritance," I whispered. Verity stood up and walked over to a calendar pinned to the concrete wall. It was marked with red ink. "Not just the inheritance," Verity corrected. She tapped the date, today's date. "It is about the signature, at midnight tonight. You turn 18, your grandfather's trust fund activates. It requires one thing to transfer the assets: your physical signature on the transfer deed. If you are alive, you control $500 million. If you are dead or missing, it goes to my next of kin," I finished, the realization settling in my gut like a stone. "My father, and through him, Lorelei," Verity said. She leaned in close, her blue eyes boring into mine. "But there is a catch. If you are just missing, they have to wait 7 years to declare you dead, unless they have a body," I said. "Or unless they have a witness to a fatal accident where the body is unrecoverable," Verity said. "That is why they picked Silver Peak. The ravines are deep, the snow is deep. Pierce will fly his drone, record footage of you falling or freezing, and they will show it to the judge. Quick declaration of death, quick payout." She checked her watch. It was an old, expensive Rolex, scratched and battered, wearing it loosely on her thin wrist. "It is 10 o'clock, Verity said. "You have 2 hours. Kimberly, at midnight, your signature is worth $500 million, but a corpse cannot sign checks." I stared at her. This homeless woman, living in a hole in the ground, knew the inner workings of my family's finances better than I did. "Who are you?" I asked again, fear mixing with awe. "You aren't just a homeless woman." Verity smiled, and for the first time, I saw the gold tooth in the back of her mouth. It was a savage, predatory smile. "No," she said. I am the ghost that Lorelei created, and we have a lot of work to do before midnight. The wind howling outside the blast doors sounded like a distant, angry ocean, but inside the bunker, the silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system and the rhythmic tapping of Verity's fingers on the metal table. She placed a stack of tattered, water-stained notebooks between us. They smelled of mildew and garbage, a sharp contrast to the sterile, recycled air of the underground room. "You look at me and you see a beggar," Verity said, her voice dropping the rough, gravelly affectation she used on the street. It became sharper, more refined, echoing a cadence I vaguely remembered from my childhood. "You see old Verity, the woman who digs through trash cans and screams at pigeons." I pulled the thermal blanket tighter around my shoulders. The warmth was returning to my body, but a different kind of chill was settling in my gut. "Who are you really?" Verity reached into the collar of her filthy coat and pulled out a necklace. It was not a trinket made of bone or wire, but a simple, tarnished silver locket. She popped it open and slid it across the table to me. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph of a woman in a sharp business suit, standing next to a man I recognized instantly, my grandfather. The woman in the photo was younger, her hair dark and styled in a severe bob, her eyes bright and piercing. "My name is Veronica Miller," she said. 20 years ago, I was the chief accountant for Wainwright Pharmaceuticals. I managed the books. I managed the trusts. I was your grandfather's right hand." I stared at the photo, then at the ruin of a woman sitting across from me. The eyes were the same. The intelligence was the same. "I remember the name," I whispered. "Dad used to talk about you. He said you stole from the company. He said you embezzled $2 million and ran away." Verity laughed, a dry barking sound that lacked any humor. "Ran away? I went to federal prison, Kimberly, 5 years in a 6x8 cell, and I didn't steal a penny." She leaned forward, the harsh LED light deepening the canyons in her face. It was Lorelei. She was just a secretary back then, new, hungry. She had her claws in Harrison within a month of starting, but she knew she couldn't get to the family fortune as long as I was guarding the vault. I saw the irregularities in her expense reports. I saw the shell companies she was trying to set up. "So she framed you," I said. It wasn't a question. The pieces were clicking together with terrifying logic. "She was brilliant, in a sociopathic way," Verity admitted. "She forged my digital signature. She planted the money in an offshore account she had opened in my name. It was textbook. But that wasn't the worst part." Verity's expression darkened. "The worst part was the day the auditors came. They dragged me into the boardroom. Your grandfather was furious. But Harrison was there too. He sat in the corner, staring at his shoes." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Dad knew?" "Harrison came to me the night before," Verity said softly. "He was crying. He told me Lorelei had found out about certain indiscretions of his, gambling debts, affairs. She threatened to expose him to your grandfather if he didn't help her get rid of me. He begged me to understand. He sacrificed me to save his own skin." I closed my eyes. The image of my father standing by the car earlier that day, turning his back as Pierce dragged me through the snow, flashed in my mind. It was not the first time he had done it. He had been practicing cowardice for 20 years. "When I got out of prison," Verity continued, "I had nothing. My husband had divorced me. My daughter wanted nothing to do with a felon. No one would hire an accountant who stole millions. I was erased." "So you came here," I said. "I decided that if the world treated me like garbage, I would live in the garbage," Verity said. She tapped the stack of dirty notebooks. "And you would be amazed at what people throw away." I reached out and opened the top notebook. The pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, columns of dates, times, and transcribed conversations. "I have lived in the woods bordering your estate for 5 years," Verity explained. "I know the schedule of the security guards better than they do. I know which windows Lorelei leaves open in the summer. I know that every Tuesday, your stepbrother throws his hard drives and burner phones into the incinerator, but he is too lazy to wait for them to burn completely." She flipped through the pages, pointing at specific entries. "Here," she said. "January 4th, Lorelei met with a representative from Omnicorp in a parked car 3 miles from the estate. They discussed a merger, not a partnership, a hostile takeover disguised as a merger. She is selling the company out from under your father." And here, she flipped to another page. February 10th, last year, Pierce paid a hacker $10,000 in Bitcoin to scrub his search history after a girl from the village went missing for 2 days. She turned up later, shaken and silent, with a sudden influx of cash in her bank account. My hands trembled as I read the notes. It was a catalog of depravity. My family wasn't just dysfunctional. They were criminals. They were monsters hiding behind silk ties and charity galas. "Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked. "With what?" Verity gestured to her rags. "The word of a crazy homeless woman against the Wainwright dynasty? They would have me committed to an asylum before I finished my sentence. I needed something undeniable. I needed the smoking gun." She looked at me, her expression softening for the first time. "And then I found out about you. I watched you grow up from the shadows. Kimberly, I saw you sitting alone in the garden. I saw the way Lorelei isolated you, and I saw the pattern repeating." Verity reached under the table and pulled out a small, sealed plastic bag. Inside was a dried, crushed flower. It looked like a common purple bell. "Do you remember how your mother died?" Verity asked. The question hit me like a physical blow. She had a heart attack. She had a weak heart condition. It was sudden. "That is what the autopsy said," Verity murmured. "But the autopsy was performed by a private coroner paid for by the estate, a friend of Lorelei." Verity placed the bag on the table. "This is foxglove, digitalis. In small doses, it stimulates the heart. In large doses, or chronic small doses over time, it causes arrhythmia, confusion, nausea, and eventually, cardiac arrest. It mimics heart failure perfectly." I stared at the purple flower. The room seemed to spin. "No," I whispered. "That's impossible." "I used to watch Lorelei in the greenhouse," Verity said relentlessly. "She grew these. She told the gardeners they were for aesthetics, but I saw her harvesting them, drying them, grinding them into a fine powder." My mind raced back to my childhood, the memories of my mother in her final months. She was always tired. She was always nauseous. Lorelei had been so helpful then, always bringing her tea, herbal tea, for her throat, for her nerves. Just like the tea Pierce had forced me to drink in the car. "The tea," I choked out. "The thermos. Ginger and honey covers the bitterness," Verity said. "She poisoned your mother. Kimberly, day by day, cup by cup. She murdered her so she could take her place. And tonight, she tried to do the same to you, just faster." A scream built up in my chest, a primal sound of grief and rage that wanted to tear my throat apart. I stood up, knocking the metal chair over. I paced the small length of the bunker, my hands gripping my hair. My mother hadn't just died. She was stolen from me. My father hadn't just remarried. He had married her killer, and he probably knew, or he suspected, and he did nothing, because he was weak, because he was comfortable. The tears that had been frozen inside me finally broke free. I collapsed onto the concrete floor, sobbing until my ribs ached. I cried for the girl I used to be. I cried for my mother. I cried for the 18 years of lies I had lived. Verity did not comfort me. She did not hug me or tell me it would be okay. She let me cry. She sat there, silent and stoic, like a witness to a necessary funeral. When the sobs finally subsided into dry heaves, Verity spoke. "Are you done?" I looked up at her. My eyes burned, but my vision was clear, clearer than it had ever been. "Yes," I said. My voice was hoarse. "Good," Verity said, "because tears are water, and water freezes out here. You cannot afford to cry anymore." I stood up. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. The sadness was receding, replaced by something cold and hard. It felt like a blade forging itself in the fire of my belly. "I want them to pay," I said. "I don't just want them in jail. I want them to suffer. I want them to lose everything the way I did." Verity nodded slowly. A grim smile touched her lips. Now you are talking like a Wainwright. But listen to me carefully. Kimberly, you cannot go back there as a victim. If you walk into that police station tomorrow, alive and crying, Lorelei will win. She will spin a story about your mental instability. She will say you ran away for attention. She has the money, the lawyers, and the press. So what do we do? I asked. Verity stood up and walked to the wall of monitors. She flicked a switch, and a screen flickered to life. It showed a grainy green night vision feed of the forest outside. The blizzard was raging, a wall of white noise. To beat a monster, you must become its fear, Verity said. Lorelei fears only one thing: losing control, losing her money, losing her status. We are going to take all of that away from her, piece by piece. She turned to me. But to do that, Kimberly Wainwright has to die. I looked at the screen. I imagined my family at the lodge, toasting to my memory, signing the papers to claim my trust fund. They thought they had won. They thought I was a frozen corpse in a ravine. I am already dead, I said, my voice steady. They killed the girl who got in that car. Good, Verity said. Then tonight, we let them believe it. We let them mourn. We let them get comfortable. We let them think they have gotten away with murder. She walked back to the table and opened a new notebook. She handed me a pen. Write down everything you know, she ordered. Every account number, every password, every name of every person your father trusts. We are going to build a trap. Kimberly, a legal, financial, and psychological trap so tight that by the time they realize they are caught, they will be begging for prison. I took the pen. It felt heavy in my hand, like a weapon. What about the cold? I asked, looking at the ventilation grate where the sound of the wind still whistled. What about survival? I will teach you, Verity said. I will teach you how to walk without leaving tracks. I will teach you how to disappear in plain sight. I will teach you how to look a man in the eye and lie so convincingly that he thanks you for it. You have 3 days before the storm clears. 3 days to become someone else. I looked down at the blank page. I wrote one word at the top, Lorelei. Then I drew a line through it, carving the ink deep into the paper. Teach me, I said. Teach me how to be the nightmare. Verity sat down opposite me. The shadows in the bunker seemed to lean in, conspiring with us. Lesson 1, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Never let them see you bleed. Even if you are dying, you smile, because nothing scares a predator more than prey that refuses to run. Outside, the storm of the century raged on, burying the world in white. But inside the bunker, the fire of revenge had just been lit, and it burned hotter than any flame. 3 days later, I sat in the glow of the bunker's monitors and watched my own eulogy broadcast live on the 6 o'clock news. Verity had done her work well. The day after the storm broke, she had hiked up the ravine using a route only the deer knew. She carried my favorite cashmere scarf, the one I had been wearing when I was dragged from the car, soaked in the blood of a rabbit she had trapped. She snagged it on a jagged branch overhanging the deepest part of the drop, a place where the snowdrifts were 10 feet deep. It was the perfect breadcrumb for a lazy police force. On the screen, Sheriff Grady stood before a cluster of microphones, his face flushed red from the cold and, more likely, the bourbon Lorelei kept stocking in his office. We found positive evidence of a fall, Grady announced, his voice grave. Based on the blood loss and the extreme temperatures, which dipped to 35 degrees below zero that night. It is the conclusion of this department that Kimberly Wainwright succumbed to the elements. Her body is likely buried under an unstable snowpack. Recovery efforts have been suspended until the spring thaw to ensure the safety of our officers. He paused, looking down at his notes. We are treating this as a tragic accident. A young girl, disoriented by the storm, wandered away from her vehicle and lost her footing. I let out a hollow laugh. Accident. He cashed the check Lorelei wrote him yet? Yesterday morning, Verity said from the corner. She was polishing a pair of vintage diamond earrings, $50,000 deposited into his wife's consulting firm account. On the screen, the camera panned to Lorelei. She was a masterpiece of manufactured grief. She wore a black dress that cost more than most people earned in a year. Cut modestly enough for a funeral, but tight enough to remind everyone she was still a vibrant, powerful woman. She stood at the podium, dabbing her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. "We are devastated," Lorelei choked out. Her voice trembled with practiced perfection. She was our light. We tried to find her." Harrison ran into the storm until his own hands froze, screaming her name. I looked at the man standing behind her. My father. Harrison looked like a ghost. His skin was gray, his eyes sunken into dark hollows. He wasn't acting. He looked like a man who was being eaten alive from the inside out. He swayed slightly, his hand gripping the podium for support. He didn't speak. He just stared at the ground, nodding vaguely whenever Lorelei mentioned his name. "He looks terrible," I whispered. A pang of conflicting emotion hit me, pity and disgust warring for dominance. "He looks like a man who just signed a death warrant," Verity corrected. "We intercepted the legal filing an hour ago. Harrison signed the affidavit of missing persons and the emergency trustee transfer. As of noon today, he is the legal guardian of your trust, and since he granted Lorelei power of attorney over his finances last year, she now controls the empire." The camera cut to Pierce. He wasn't even trying to look sad. He stood off to the side, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. He was texting. "Look at him," Verity said, pointing a screwdriver at the screen. "He ordered a custom McLaren yesterday, $300,000. He put the deposit down before the search party even came back." I stood up and walked to the small bathroom mirror. The girl staring back at me was a stranger. My long golden blonde hair, the Wainwright trademark, was gone. Verity had hacked it off with kitchen shears to a sharp, jagged bob that barely touched my chin. We had dyed it a deep, ink-black color that made my skin look porcelain pale. I popped in the colored contact lenses Verity had sourced from one of her old contacts. My eyes, naturally a warm hazel, were now a piercing, artificial gray. "Are you ready?" Verity asked. She stepped into the light. The homeless woman was gone. In her place stood Mrs. V, a wealthy, eccentric widow from the East Coast. She wore a vintage fur coat that smelled of mothballs and money, and her gray hair was swept up in an elegant chignon. She looked formidable. "I am ready," I said, smoothing down the black suit we had bought from a thrift store and tailored to fit my new, sharper frame. "Let us go pay our respects." The memorial service was held at the Wainwright estate, in the grand ballroom where I used to take ballet lessons as a child. It was grotesque. Lorelei had turned my funeral into a networking event. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and caviar. A string quartet played somber but unobtrusive music in the corner. The room was filled with the city's elite, partners, investors, politicians, and socialites, all pretending to mourn a girl they barely spoke to when she was alive. Verity and I walked in through the main doors. I kept my head high, my posture rigid. I was posing as Mrs. V's personal assistant, a silent, efficient shadow. Mrs. V swept into the room, commanding attention immediately. She grabbed the arm of a bewildered banker. "Darling, tragic, simply tragic. I knew her grandfather. You know, he would be spinning in his grave." While Verity created a diversion with her loud voice and flamboyant gestures, I slipped into the crowd. I moved like a ghost. I heard snippets of conversation that made my blood boil. Shame about the girl. But honestly, the stock price might stabilize now that the succession question is resolved, a man in a navy suit said, sipping his drink. "Heard she was unstable. Drugs, maybe? Running off into a blizzard isn't something a sane person does," a woman whispered behind her fan. I clenched my fists at my sides but forced my face to remain impassive. Let them talk. I told myself, they are writing their own sentences. I spotted Pierce near the buffet. He was laughing, actually laughing. He was surrounded by a group of his sycophantic friends, recounting the search with dramatic flair. It was crazy, man, Pierce said, popping a shrimp canapé into his mouth. The wind was like a hurricane. I tried to grab her, but she just slipped away. Nature is brutal. One of his friends clapped him on the back. You are a hero for trying. Bro, seriously. And hey, at least you get the big room now, right? Pierce grinned. Yeah, Lorelei said I could turn her bedroom into a gaming lounge. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest, turning my heart into a block of ice. They weren't just erasing me, they were overriding my existence. I turned away before I did something reckless, like stab him with a cocktail fork. I had a mission. I located Harrison. He was sitting alone in a high-backed armchair near the fireplace, nursing a tumbler of scotch. He looked isolated, surrounded by people yet completely alone. I walked past him, close enough that the hem of my jacket brushed his knee. He looked up, his eyes bleary and unfocused. He looked at me, frowned, and squinted. For a second, I thought he recognized me, but then he shook his head, blaming the alcohol, and looked back down at his glass. He didn't see his daughter. He just saw a dark-haired stranger. I waited until Lorelei began her speech. The room fell silent as she took the microphone, launching into another tearful monologue about the daughter I never had. Under the cover of her performance, I slipped out of the ballroom and into the main hallway. The house was quiet, the staff all busy catering to the guests. I took off my heels and ran up the grand staircase in my stocking feet, skipping the third step that always creaked. I knew this house. I knew its bones. I went straight to Harrison's study. The door was unlocked. Lorelei was so arrogant she didn't think anyone would dare enter. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and fear. I went to his computer. It was password protected, but I knew my father. He was a creature of habit. I typed in 1985, the year he married my mother. Access denied. I paused. He had changed it. I tried Lorelei. Access denied. I closed my eyes and thought, what was the one thing Harrison truly cared about? What was the one thing he had lost? I typed in Kimberly. The screen unlocked. My heart twisted. He used my name as his password while he signed the papers to bury me. The complexity of his guilt was nauseating. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket. Verity had loaded it with a keylogger and a remote access Trojan. I plugged it in. The installation bar crept across the screen. 10%. 50%. Downstairs, I heard applause. Lorelei had finished her speech. I didn't have much time. 90%. Done. I pulled the drive and wiped the port with my sleeve. Now, every keystroke, every email, every conversation recorded by the computer's microphone would be sent directly to the server in the bunker. I wasn't done yet. I slipped out of the office and walked down the hall to the master bedroom, my parents' old room, now Lorelei's domain. I pushed the door open. The room had been redecorated in gaudy gold and cream. My mother's antique vanity was gone, replaced by a modern monstrosity covered in perfumes and lotions. I walked over to the bed, on Harrison's side. The pillow was indented, as if he had been lying there recently, staring at the ceiling. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the object I had saved from the day of the accident. It was the only thing I had managed to keep hidden in my bra when Pierce searched me. A silver hair clip, shaped like a butterfly, with tiny sapphire eyes. My mother had given it to me on my 10th birthday, 2 days before she died. Harrison knew it. He had bought it for her to give to me. It was a distinctive, one-of-a-kind piece commissioned from a jeweler in Paris. Lorelei had told Harrison it was lost in the accident. She told him I had dropped it in the snow. I placed the clip gently in the center of Harrison's pillow. The silver glinted against the white silk. It was a message, a ghost story. It said, I was here. I am watching. You cannot bury the truth. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, stumbling footsteps. Harrison. I slipped into the walk-in closet, hiding behind a row of Lorelei's fur coats. I held my breath. Harrison stumbled into the room. He loosened his tie, gasping for air as if he were drowning. He walked to the bed and collapsed onto it, burying his face in his hands. God, he moaned. Oh God, Kimmy, I'm sorry. He rolled over to bury his face in the pillow. Then he froze. He sat up slowly. His trembling hand reached out and touched the cold metal of the butterfly clip. He picked it up, bringing it close to his face. He whispered. His voice was a ragged squeak. No, no, no. He looked around the empty room, his eyes wide with terror. Lorelei? Lorelei! He scrambled off the bed, backing away as if the pillow were on fire. She's here. She's here. I smiled in the darkness of the closet. The seed was planted. Paranoid men make mistakes, and Harrison was about to become the most paranoid man in North Dakota. I waited until he ran into the bathroom to splash water on his face. Then I slipped out of the room, down the back servant's stairs, and out the kitchen door. Verity was waiting for me by the catering van, smoking a cigarette. Done? She asked. The bug is planted, I said, putting my heels back on. And Harrison is seeing ghosts. Good, Verity said, tossing the cigarette into the snow. Let us go home. Tonight. They celebrate. Tomorrow. We start the audit. As we drove away in Verity's battered truck, I looked back at the house on the hill. It was glowing with light and music. It looked like a castle, but I knew the truth. It was a house of cards, and I had just removed the bottom ace. We moved from the subterranean bunker to a high-rise apartment in downtown Fargo. Verity, operating under her Mrs. V alias, had leased the place using a shell corporation and a credit history she had fabricated out of thin air. The apartment was sterile, modern, and most importantly, had a fiber optic internet connection that was fast enough to crack NASA. It was our war room. For the last 48 hours, I had been glued to the monitors, watching my former life play out through the digital eyes of my father's compromised computer. The keylogger Verity and I planted during the funeral was singing like a canary. Every keystroke Harrison made, every email Lorelei sent. It all appeared on my screen in real time. She is moving fast, Verity said. Walking into the living room with 2 mugs of black coffee, she placed one next to my keyboard. Faster than I anticipated. I pointed at the screen. Look at this. An email from the CEO of Omnicorp. Subject: Acquisition of Wainwright Controlling Interest. Date: today. Verity leaned over my shoulder. Her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She is selling the company. She is not even waiting for the ink to dry on the death certificate. She is liquidating my heritage, I said, my voice cold. Omnicorp is a chop shop. They buy pharmaceutical companies, strip the patents, fire the researchers, and sell the real estate. If she signs this deal, Wainwright Pharmaceuticals ceases to exist, and she walks away with $500 million in cash. Not if we get there first, Verity said. Do you remember the code? I closed my eyes. My grandfather had been a paranoid man. He loved me, but he didn't trust the world. On my 16th birthday, he had taken me into his study and made me memorize a sequence of numbers and a phrase. He told me it was the skeleton key, a failsafe he had built into the family trust's Swiss holding accounts, bypassing all local signatories. Lorelei knew about the accounts, but she didn't know about the back door. I remember, I said. I opened a secure browser and navigated to the login portal of the rich Banque Privée in Geneva. The interface was austere, just a black screen with a single prompt. Lorelei would be logging in through the front door with her power of attorney credentials. I was going in through the chimney. I typed in the alphanumeric string my grandfather had taught me. It was long, 32 characters. My fingers flew across the keys. Access granted. The screen flooded with data. I was looking at the heart of the Wainwright fortune. There it is, I whispered. The pending transaction. Omnicorp has already staged the funds in escrow, $500 million, waiting for Lorelei's final authorization signature to release the shares. She is scheduling the signing for 3 o'clock this afternoon, Verity noted, checking the intercepted calendar on the other monitor. Digital signature, remote closing. Can you stop it? I asked. Verity shook her head. If we stop it, she will know something is wrong. She will investigate. We need her to think she has won. We need her to feel the weight of that money in her pocket before we turn it into lead. I smiled. It was a cruel smile, one I had learned from Lorelei herself. So we let the sale go through. We let the sale go through, Verity agreed. But we changed the destination. I accessed the routing protocol for the trust account. The system showed the default payout account. A Cayman Islands shell company named Phoenix Rising, undoubtedly owned by Lorelei. Change it, Verity commanded. I deleted the Cayman routing number. In its place, I entered 2 new sets of numbers. The first was for a dormant account Verity had set up years ago. A ghost account that existed in the banking system but had been flagged by the Treasury Department as frozen due to suspected and fabricated ties to sanctioned entities. Any money that touched it would be instantly locked down, requiring months, if not years, of federal litigation to release. The second was a split routing command. I directed 10% of the sale price, $50 million, to an anonymous donor account for the National Homeless Coalition. Done, I said, hitting the enter key. When she clicks sign at 3 o'clock, she will technically sell the company. Omnicorp will get the shares. But Lorelei won't get a dime. The money will fly out of escrow and slam straight into a concrete wall. And the best part, Verity added, is that the bank's interface will still show transaction complete. She won't know the money is frozen until she tries to spend it, and by then, she will have already dug her own grave. We watched the clock tick down. At exactly 3 o'clock, the status on the screen changed. Transaction executed. Funds transferred. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. She did it. She sold it. Now watch the fallout, Verity said. Almost immediately, the keylogger on the other screen began to scroll wildly. Lorelei was typing. We saw her navigate to a luxury real estate brokerage site. She was drafting purchase agreements. She is buying the penthouse at 157 in New York. I read the screen. $60 million, and a villa in Tuscany, and, good Lord, she is putting a deposit down on a private jet. She is spending money she doesn't have. Verity chuckled dryly. She is signing legally binding contracts based on a balance that is currently $0 accessible dollars. When those checks bounce, she is going to be facing fraud charges from 3 different directions. But that is not enough, I said, standing up and pacing the room. I want her scared. I want her looking over her shoulder. Verity walked to her desk, where a stack of official-looking papers sat next to a laser printer. That is where I come in. While you were playing banker, I was playing the IRS. She held up a document. It was a flawless forgery of a notice of audit from the Internal Revenue Service, specifically targeting the Phoenix Rising shell company. I routed this through a spoofed email server to her private inbox. Verity explained. It says they have detected irregularities in her offshore holdings and are initiating a deep dive audit. It explicitly mentions the embezzlement scheme she used to frame me 20 years ago. I looked at Verity with admiration. She will think someone talked. She will think Harrison talked, Verity corrected. He is the only other person who knows about the embezzlement. Paranoia is a powerful solvent. It dissolves loyalty faster than acid. Speaking of Harrison, I said, sitting back down, let us see how my father is enjoying his grief. I pulled up the feed from the cameras we had hacked, not just the laptop camera, but the security cameras inside the house. Pierce had installed a high-end system years ago to monitor the staff. Unaware that he was building his own panopticon, on the screen, Harrison was in the library. He was pacing back and forth, holding the silver butterfly clip I had left on his pillow. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing the same clothes as yesterday, muttering to himself. He hasn't slept, I observed. Guilt is a powerful stimulant, Verity said. I opened a program on my laptop that allowed me to control the smart home features of the estate. Pierce had connected everything to the central Wi-Fi. The lights, the thermostat, even the sound system. Time for a seance, I whispered. I waited until Harrison walked past the large mirror in the hallway. I remotely flickered the hallway lights, 3 short blinks, then darkness for 2 seconds, then back on. Harrison froze. He spun around, staring at the lights. Then, I accessed the multi-room audio system. I isolated the speakers in the library and played a file I had recorded earlier. It was just a whisper, barely audible, processed to sound like it was coming from inside the walls. "Daddy." Harrison dropped his glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, whiskey splashing everywhere. He spun in circles, his eyes wild. "Kimmy?" he shouted at the empty room. "Kimmy, is that you?" I didn't answer. I just lowered the temperature in the room by 10 degrees, using the smart thermostat. "He thinks he is haunted," I said. "He is cracking." "Now for the brother," Verity said. "Check the tracker." I switched tabs. Pierce's phone GPS showed he was at a high-end club in the city, likely celebrating his new wealth. I opened a messaging app that allowed me to spoof the sender ID. I entered my old cell phone number, the one that was currently lying at the bottom of a ravine, buried under 10 feet of snow. I typed a message. "It is so cold down here. Pierce, why didn't you come back for me?" I hit send. On the tracker, I saw the dot representing Pierce stop moving. He was probably staring at his phone screen in the middle of the dance floor, the blood draining from his face. I sent another one. "I can see the drone. Pierce, it is watching you too." The dot on the map suddenly moved rapidly toward the exit of the club. He was running. "He is going home," I said. "He is terrified." Back on the house cameras, the drama was escalating. Lorelei stormed into the library, holding a tablet. She looked furious. "Harrison," she screamed. "Did you speak to anyone? Did you speak to the feds?" Harrison looked at her, confused and terrified. "What? No, Lorelei. I heard her. I heard Kimberly. She is in the house." Lorelei slapped him. The sound was crisp and loud on the audio feed. "Stop it," she hissed. "She is dead. We killed her. Stop being a coward." "I just got an email from the IRS. Harrison, they know about the Phoenix account. They know about 1995. The only person who could have told them is you." "I didn't," Harrison sobbed, clutching the butterfly clip. "It's her ghost. She is punishing us." Lorelei stared at him with pure disgust. "You are losing your mind. You are a liability." She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. We listened in. "Dr. Arrington? This is Lorelei Wainwright. Yes, it is an emergency. My husband. He is having a psychotic break. He is hallucinating. He is violent. I think we need to have him committed for observation. Immediately. Yes, tonight. I will sign the papers." She hung up and looked at Harrison with cold, reptilian eyes. "If you are going to be crazy, Harrison, you can do it in a padded cell where you can't talk to the police." "She is turning on him," Verity said. "She is going to lock him up to secure her control." "She thinks she is cleaning up loose ends," I said. "She thinks Harrison is the threat. She has no idea." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Pierce was speeding home in a panic. Harrison was about to be dragged away by men in white coats. And Lorelei was sitting on a throne of debt, thinking she was the queen of the world. "It is time," I said. "Time for what?" Verity asked. "Time to stop being a ghost," I replied. I turned back to her, catching my reflection in the dark glass, the black hair, the sharp suit, the gray eyes. I didn't look like Kimberly Wainwright anymore. I looked like her executioner. "Tomorrow morning is the shareholder meeting to announce the merger," I said. "Lorelei will be there, the board will be there, the press will be there. And I think the majority shareholder should make an appearance," I said. "I am going to walk through that front door. Verity, I am going to look Lorelei in the eye, and I am going to watch her world burn down while she is still standing in it." Verity smiled, a slow, dangerous expression that matched my own. "Then you had better wear the red lipstick, my dear. It looks better on camera." The ballroom of the Wainwright corporate headquarters was a cathedral of glass and steel, suspended 30 stories above the frozen streets of the city. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. I stood just outside the heavy double doors of polished mahogany. My hand rested on the brass handle. It felt cold, grounding. Inside, I could hear Lorelei's voice amplified by the sound system. She was in her element. This merger with Omnicorp represents not just a business decision, but a legacy, she was saying, her voice smooth as silk. It is the future that my late husband, Harrison, and his father before him would have wanted. While we still mourn the tragic and untimely loss of Kimberly, we must honor her memory by ensuring the strength of the Wainwright name endures. I adjusted the cuffs of my suit. It was not the cashmere cardigans and floral dresses of the girl who fell down the mountain. Verity and I had spent 3 hours with a private tailor yesterday, paying triple for a rush order. I was wearing a bespoke, slate-gray power suit with sharp, architectural lines that made me look taller, older, and dangerous. My hair, the dyed black bob, was slicked back. My lips were painted a deep, blood red. I looked at the security guard standing next to me. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. He didn't recognize me. To him, I was just a terrifying woman who had bypassed the front desk with an authorization code that shouldn't exist. "Open the doors," I said. It wasn't a request. The guard nodded, fumbling for his keycard. The lock clicked. He pushed the heavy doors open. Light from the hundreds of camera flashes and chandeliers spilled out into the hallway. I stepped into it. The sound of my heels on the marble floor was sharp and rhythmic. Click, click, click. It cut through the low murmur of the crowd like a metronome counting down to an explosion. Lorelei was standing at the podium, a giant screen behind her displaying the merged logo of Wainwright and Omnicorp. She was raising a glass of champagne. Harrison stood beside her, looking like a wax figure melting under the stage lights. Pierce was there too, shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking nervous. At first, no one noticed me. All eyes were on the stage. Then, a head turned in the back row, then another. A ripple of confusion spread through the room. The murmurs stopped. The silence spread like a contagion, moving from the back of the room to the front, until the only sound left was the click, click, click of my approach. Lorelei, sensing the shift in the room's energy, looked up from her notes. She shielded her eyes against the glare of the spotlights. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" she demanded, her voice echoing in the sudden quiet. I walked straight down the center aisle. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I saw the faces of board members I had known since childhood. I saw the Omnicorp executives. I saw the shock registering on their faces as they realized who was walking toward the stage. I stopped 10 feet from the podium. I stood in the center of the spotlight, letting everyone see me. Not a ghost, not a corpse, but the air. "Hello? Lorelei," I said. My voice was calm, clear, and projected to the back of the room without a microphone. "I hope I'm not too late for the toast." Harrison made a sound that was half gasp, half whelp. The crystal flute in his hand slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor and shattered. The sound like a gunshot in the silent room. Champagne splashed onto his shoes. But he didn't move. He stared at me, his eyes bulging, his face draining of all color until he looked like the dead one. "Kimberly?" he whispered. It was barely audible. Lorelei gripped the podium so hard her knuckles turned white. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out, for the first time in her life. She was speechless. The script she had written for this moment had just been burned. Pierce took a step back, knocking into a flower arrangement. "No," he muttered. "No, I saw the drone. The snow." I walked up the stairs to the stage. I moved with a predatory grace Lorelei had never taught me. I walked right up to the microphone, gently taking it from Lorelei's frozen hand. "Excuse me," I said to her, flashing a tight, polite smile that didn't reach my gray eyes. I turned to the crowd. The cameras were going wild now. Flashes erupted like a strobe light. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, members of the board," I began. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance. As you can imagine, the last few days have been difficult." I looked at the camera with the red tally light. I was speaking to the world now. "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. I said. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, but the tension remained thick enough to choke on. I was indeed involved in a terrible accident during the storm at Silver Peak. I was lost, confused, and suffering from severe hypothermia. I paused, letting the sympathy build. I would have died out there if not for the miraculous intervention of a local Samaritan, a wonderful woman named Mrs. V, who found me and brought me to a private medical facility. Due to the trauma, I suffered from temporary amnesia. I only regained my memory yesterday morning. It was a lie so bold, so audacious, that it had to be true. No one questions the victim who returns from the grave. I turned to face my family. This was the moment. I want to thank my stepmother, Lorelei, I said, my voice dripping with saccharine sweetness, for stepping up in my absence, for trying to manage the company during such a chaotic time. It must have been so hard for you, planning a funeral while negotiating a merger. Lorelei's eyes narrowed. She heard the threat beneath the gratitude. She knew I was lying about amnesia. She knew that I knew, but she couldn't say a word. To deny my story would be to admit she had left me there. However, I continued, my voice hardening just a fraction, I am back now, and as I am very much alive, and as I celebrated my 18th birthday 3 days ago, the terms of my grandfather's trust are quite clear. I signaled to the back of the room. Verity, dressed in her immaculate Mrs. V disguise, stood up. Beside her was a man in a sharp blue suit. He carried a briefcase. This is Mr. Sterling, I announced. My personal attorney. He has already filed the necessary paperwork with the court this morning. Since there is no death certificate, the emergency transfer of power to my father is null and void. The trusteeship reverts to me, effective immediately. I looked at the Omnicorp CEO, a heavy-set man sitting in the front row. I am afraid, sir, that any agreements signed by my stepmother regarding the sale of Wainwright Pharmaceuticals are invalid. She did not have the authority to sell what does not belong to her. The room erupted. Reporters were shouting questions. The Omnicorp CEO looked furious. The board members looked panicked. Lorelei finally found her voice. She stepped forward, trying to regain control. She put a hand on my shoulder, a heavy, possessive grip. "Kimberly, darling," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. She leaned into the microphone. "We are just so relieved you are safe. That is all that matters. The business. The business was just a precaution. I was merely holding the fort, keeping your legacy safe." I looked at her hand on my shoulder. Then I looked at her face. "Of course you were," I said softly. "You were just keeping it safe. Like you kept my mother's jewelry safe. Like you kept my father safe." I pulled away from her touch as if she were contagious. "But now that I am here, we need to ensure everything is in order, which is why my first act as majority shareholder is to order a complete, forensic audit of the company finances for the past 10 years. Lorelei flinched as if I had slapped her. "An audit?" she hissed, away from the mic. "That is unnecessary. Our internal team—" "Is fired," I interrupted. I pointed to the man standing next to Verity. "Mr. Sterling and his firm, Sterling and Associates, will be conducting the review. They specialize in uncovering irregularities, embezzlement, fraud, shell companies." I saw the blood drain from Lorelei's face completely. She looked at Harrison. Harrison was looking at the floor, shaking. "I am sure you have nothing to hide, Lorelei," I said, loud enough for the board to hear. "Right?" She stared at me. Hate radiated off her in waves. "Of course not." "Excellent," I said. "Then let us get to work." I walked off the stage. The press conference was over. The merger was dead, and the war had officially begun. Security ushered the family into a private holding room behind the stage to escape the press. As soon as the door clicked shut, the facade dropped. Harrison collapsed onto a sofa, burying his face in his hands. "I saw you," he mumbled. "I saw you die." "You saw what you wanted to see, Dad," I said, standing over him. "It is easier to sign a paper than to search for a daughter, isn't it?" Pierce was standing in the corner, looking like a trapped rat. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I walked over to him. I stood close, invading his personal space. I could smell the fear on him. It smelled like sweat and expensive cologne. I leaned in, bringing my lips close to his ear so only he could hear. "I got your text, Pierce," I whispered. "But you didn't reply to mine." He flinched. "I remember," I murmured. "I remember the tea. It tasted like ginger and betrayal. I remember the cold. It felt like needles. And I remember the drone." I pulled back slightly to look him in the eye. "I remember the taste of the sedative. Do you remember the taste of the snow?" Pierce's knees gave way. He slid down the wall, sliding into a crouching position. "It wasn't my idea," he stammered. "Mom, she made me." "Shut up, you idiot," Lorelei snapped. She was pacing the room like a caged tiger. She turned on me. "You think you have won? You think a little girl in a suit scares me?" "I don't need to scare you, Lorelei," I said calmly. "I own you." "You have no proof," she spat. "It is your word against mine. I will have you declared mentally incompetent. I will say the trauma made you delusional. I will tie this up in court for 20 years. "You can try," I said. "But while you are in court, Mr. Sterling will be going through the books. He will find the Phoenix Rising account. He will find the payments to the sheriff. He will find everything." Lorelei stopped pacing. She looked at Harrison, then at Pierce, then at me. She realized her position. She couldn't kill me. Not now. The whole world knew I was alive. If I died tomorrow, a fall down the stairs, a sudden heart attack, the police would be at her door in 5 minutes. She needed me alive to prove she wasn't a murderer. But she also needed me dead to stop the audit. It was a stalemate, a cold war inside the Wainwright mansion. "We are going home," Lorelei announced, her voice icy. "We are going to have a family dinner, and we are going to discuss this like civilized people." "I look forward to it," I said. "I'll be moving back into my room, the one with the lock on the door." "You are making a mistake, Kimberly," Lorelei warned, grabbing her coat. "You are playing a game you don't understand." I smiled. It was the smile Verity had taught me, the smile of the wolf greeting the lamb. "I am not playing, Lorelei," I said. "I am just keeping score." I watched them leave the room. Harrison, broken. Pierce, terrified. Lorelei, plotting. I took out my phone and sent a text to Verity. "Phase 1 complete. The rats are back in the cage." I walked out of the room and into the flashbulbs, ready to play the part of the loving daughter one last time before I burned their house to the ground. The days following my resurrection were a blur of legal maneuvering and suffocating tension. The Wainwright estate had transformed from a home into a battlefield, with the dining room table serving as the demilitarized zone. Lorelei's strategy was predictable. She attacked my story. She hired a team of private investigators to tear apart my amnesia claim, looking for any gap in the timeline that she could use to prove I was mentally unstable or worse, a fraud. But she was playing checkers while Verity was playing three-dimensional chess. On Tuesday morning, we sat in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Sterling and Associates. Lorelei was there with her shark of a lawyer. A man named Henderson who smelled of cigarettes and cheap cologne. Verity, still fully committed to the role of the eccentric Mrs. V, sat next to me, draped in a fox fur stole that had seen better days but still screamed old money. "This is preposterous," Henderson sneered, tossing a file onto the table. "You expect us to believe that Miss Wainwright simply wandered into a private clinic in Montana, 40 miles from the crash site, with no ID and no memory?" Verity didn't blink. She reached into her oversized Hermes bag and pulled out a thick medical dossier. "Not wandered, Mr. Henderson," Verity said, her voice dripping with disdain. "She was found by my groundskeeper. I had her transported to the street. Jude Private Recovery Center. Here are the admission forms, the toxicology reports showing severe hypothermia, and the psychiatric evaluation diagnosing dissociative fugue state caused by trauma." She slid the papers across the table. They were perfect forgeries. Verity had spent 20 years in prison and on the streets. She knew every forger, hacker, and document doctor from here to Chicago. The stamps were real. The doctor's signature belonged to a real physician who had lost his license for opioid distribution and was now very happy to sign anything for $5,000 cash. Henderson flipped through the pages, looking for a flaw. He wouldn't find one. The dates align perfectly, Verity added, sipping her tea. I paid for her treatment in cash to protect her privacy until her memory returned. You should be thanking me. Lorelei, I saved your stepdaughter while you were busy measuring the drapes for her coffin. Lorelei stared at the documents, her jaw tight. She knew it was fake. She knew I hadn't been in Montana, but she couldn't prove it without admitting she knew exactly where I really was, at the bottom of a ravine in North Dakota. Fine, Lorelei said, her voice tight. The medical records stand, but the mental competency hearing is unnecessary, I interrupted. I leaned forward, clasping my hands. Because while you were checking my medical history, the auditors were checking yours. I nodded to Mr. Sterling. He opened a laptop and connected it to the room's projector. A spreadsheet appeared on the wall. It was a sea of red ink. We have completed the preliminary forensic audit of the last 5 fiscal years, Mr. Sterling announced. The results are disturbing. Lorelei shifted in her seat. Every company has losses. Not like this, Sterling said. We found a pattern of systematic siphoning. Shell companies are set up in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and Delaware. Invoices for consulting services paid to firms that do not exist. Overinflated construction contracts for facility repairs that never happened. He pointed to a figure at the bottom of the screen. In total, $22 million have been misappropriated from the Wainwright operational budget since you took power of attorney over Harrison's finances, Sterling concluded. The room went silent. $22 million. It was a staggering sum, written out in black and white. That is a lie, Lorelei hissed. Harrison approved every one of those transactions. Did he? I asked softly. I pulled a separate folder from my briefcase. I took the liberty of reviewing the signature logs. It seems my father has been very busy. Signing authorizations at 3 a.m, signing transfers while he was supposedly in rehab, signing contracts on days when the GPS data from his car shows he was nowhere near the office. I looked at Lorelei. It looks like forgery, Lorelei, or coercion. Both are felonies. The meeting ended abruptly after that. Lorelei stormed out, dragging Henderson behind her. She looked like a trapped animal, vicious and desperate. That night, I found my father in the greenhouse. It was his sanctuary, a humid glass box filled with orchids he barely tended anymore. He was sitting on a bench, staring at a dying bloom. He looked older than his 50 years. The guilt was eating him alive, hollowing him out like a pumpkin. "Dad," I said. He jumped, nearly knocking over a pot. "Kimmy, I didn't hear you coming." "We need to talk," I said. I sat down next to him. The air smelled of damp earth and fertilizer, a stark contrast to the sterile scent of the boardroom. "I saw the signatures. Dad," I said gently. "I know you didn't steal that money. I know she made you sign those papers." Harrison put his head in his hands. "You don't understand. She knows things." "I know she has something on you," I said. "I know about the gambling debts in Vegas. I know about the $3 million you borrowed from the pension fund 10 years ago to pay them off." Harrison looked up, his face pale. "How?" "It doesn't matter how," I said. "What matters is that she has been using that to blackmail you for a decade. She owns you because you are afraid of going to jail." I took his hand. His skin was cold and clammy. "But here's the truth, Dad. If you stick with her, you are going down with her. The audit proves the fraud. When the FBI gets involved, and they will, you will be charged as an accomplice to embezzlement and attempted murder." He flinched at the word murder. "But there is a way out," I lied. "Turn state's witness. Testify against her. Tell the authorities she forced you to sign. Tell them she planned the trip to Silver Peak. If you help us take her down, Mr. Sterling can cut a deal. Immunity. You walk away free. It was the lifeline he had been praying for. I watched the hope flicker in his watery eyes. Really? He whispered. I can be free of her? Yes, I said. But you have to do it now. Tonight. You have to sign a sworn affidavit. I pulled a document from my pocket and a pen. Sign this, Dad. Be the father I need you to be. Just for once. He took the pen. His hand trembled. He looked at the paper, then at me. For a second, I saw a flash of love in his eyes. He was going to do it. He was going to choose me. Then, the fear returned. I need to think, he stammered, pulling his hand back. I can't just... She will kill me. Kimmy, you don't know her. She can't hurt you if she's in prison, I pressed. I need time, he said, standing up abruptly. Just give me until tomorrow morning, please. I looked at him. I knew exactly what he was going to do. I had counted on it. Okay, Dad, I said, standing up. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Don't make me wait. I walked out of the greenhouse, leaving him alone with his demons. As soon as I was out of sight, I pulled out my phone and opened the surveillance app. He is moving. Verity's voice crackled in my earpiece. He is heading straight for the master bedroom. I watched on the screen as Harrison ran up the stairs. He didn't go to his room. He went to hers. Lorelei was sitting at her vanity, aggressively brushing her hair. When Harrison burst in, she didn't even turn around. What is it, Harrison? She snapped. I have a headache. She knows, Harrison blurted out, gasping for breath. Kimberly knows about the gambling. She knows about the coerced signatures. She wanted me to sign an affidavit. Lorelei spun around. And? Did you sign it? No, Harrison cried, falling to his knees beside her chair. No, I didn't. I came straight to you. I told you I'm loyal. Lorelei, I didn't betray you. I watched the screen, feeling a cold, hard knot tighten in my stomach, even with a direct path to redemption. He chose the leash. He was not a victim anymore. He was a volunteer. Lorelei looked at him with a mixture of contempt and calculation. She reached out and patted his cheek. Good boy, she purred. You did the right thing. Harrison, go to bed. I will handle this. What are you going to do? Harrison asked, trembling. I said go to bed, she screamed. Harrison fled the room. As soon as he was gone, Lorelei locked the door. She went to her closet and pulled out a burner phone from a shoebox. She is making the call, I whispered to Verity. Record everything. Lorelei dialed a number. It rang 3 times. It's me, Lorelei said. Her voice was devoid of emotion. The problem hasn't gone away. In fact, it has gotten worse. I need a permanent solution. Tonight. A pause. 2 targets, she continued. The girl and the old woman. They are at the penthouse downtown. No, I don't care how much it costs. Use the account in the Caymans. I want them gone. And I want it to look like a robbery gone wrong. She hung up. Got it, Verity said. We have the solicitation of murder on tape. That is 20 years to life right there. Not enough, I said. We need to catch the hand holding the knife. Who did she call? Tracing it now, Verity said. It is a disposable number, but the signal triangulates to a dive bar in South Fargo. Known hangout for the distinctively unlegal element. His name is likely Silas. He is a fixer for the local cartel. He will want payment up front, I said. Lorelei promised him money from the Cayman account. The account we just froze, Verity reminded me. Exactly, I smiled. When he tries to withdraw the fee, the transaction is going to be declined, and a hitman who doesn't get paid is a very angry employee. I opened my laptop. It was time to pull the trigger on the financial trap. I logged into the backdoor banking portal. I initiated a total liquidity freeze on all Wainwright family accounts. Harrison's, Lorelei's, even the joint checking accounts. I flagged them all for suspicious activity, using the administrator privileges I had hijacked. Assets are frozen, I said. She can't buy a stick of gum. let alone a double homicide. 2 hours later, the drama unfolded exactly as we had scripted it. We were watching the living room feed from the estate. Lorelei was pacing, waiting for the news of our demise. Instead, her phone rang. She answered it. "Is it done?" "You played me," a deep, gravelly voice roared through the speakerphone. "The transfer was declined. Insufficient funds. Account locked." "That is impossible," Lorelei shrieked. "There is $10 million in that account." "I don't care what you think is in there," the voice growled. "I went to the drop, and there was nothing. You think you can hire Silas Vance and stiff him?" Wait, Lorelei pleaded. "It must be a banking error. I will write you a check. I have cash in the safe." "I am coming over," Silas said. "And if you don't have $50,000 in cash waiting for me, I am taking it out of your skin." The line went dead. Lorelei stood there, phone shaking in her hand. She ran to the wall safe hidden behind a painting. She spun the dial and threw it open. It was empty. I had emptied it 3 days ago during the funeral. Panic setting in, Verity narrated. Heart rate elevating, rational thought disengaging. "She has nowhere to go," I said. "She can't call the police because she hired a hitman. She can't call the bank because the accounts are frozen. She is trapped in the house she stole." 20 minutes later, the front door of the estate was kicked in. The security alarm should have gone off, but I had disabled it remotely. Silas Vance walked into the foyer. He was a mountain of a man, wearing a leather jacket and holding a suppressed pistol. He wasn't trying to be stealthy. He was trying to be terrifying. Lorelei stood at the top of the stairs, holding a small revolver, the pearl-handled one she kept in her nightstand. "Get out," she screamed. "I will shoot." "You hired me to kill your stepdaughter," Silas shouted, walking up the stairs. "Now you want to shoot me? You are a messy woman, Lorelei." "I said stop." Lorelei fired a warning shot. It hit the chandelier, sending crystal shards raining down on the foyer. Harrison ran out of his bedroom, wearing his silk pajamas. He saw the man with the gun, saw his wife firing wildly. "What is happening?" he wailed. "Who is this?" "This is the guy your wife hired to kill your daughter." Silas laughed. "But she forgot to pay the bill." The confession, loud and clear, captured in high-definition video and audio by the cameras Pierce had installed to spy on the maids. "We have it," Verity said. "We have everything. Solicitation, attempted murder, financial fraud, and now armed confrontation." "Call the police," I said, "and send the footage to the FBI." "Already done," Verity replied. "Sirens are 3 minutes out." On the screen, the situation was deteriorating. Silas lunged at Lorelei. She fired again, but missed. He tackled her to the ground. Harrison tried to intervene, grabbing Silas's arm, but the hitman backhanded him with the pistol grip, sending my father tumbling down the stairs. Harrison landed in a heap at the bottom, unconscious. Lorelei was screaming, struggling under the weight of the hitman. "Police!" a voice boomed from the front door. "Drop the weapon." Sheriff Grady, Lorelei's pet sheriff, burst in, gun drawn, but behind him were men in windbreakers with FBI printed on the back. Silas froze. He looked at the cops, then at Lorelei. He made a calculation. He dropped the gun and raised his hands. "She hired me!" Silas yelled, pointing at Lorelei. "She hired me to kill Kimberly Wainwright. I have the texts. I have the call logs." Lorelei scrambled up, her dress torn, her hair a mess. She looked at the FBI agents. She looked at the sheriff. She looked at her unconscious husband. For a moment, I thought she might surrender. Then, she saw the sheriff, her ally. "Grady!" she screamed. "Shoot him! He is an intruder. He tried to kill us." Sheriff Grady hesitated. He looked at the FBI agents. He knew the game was up. He lowered his weapon. "Step away from him, Mrs. Wainwright," Grady said, his voice defeated. "It is over." An FBI agent stepped forward and cuffed Lorelei. She screamed, kicking and spitting. A feral animal finally cornered. They dragged her out of the mansion, past the shattered chandelier and the body of her husband. I watched it all from the safety of the penthouse, sipping a cup of chamomile tea. "You look disappointed," Verity said, closing the laptop. "Not disappointed," I said, "just unsatisfied." "She is going to prison for the rest of her life," Verity said. "Is that not enough?" "Prison is too easy," I said, staring at the empty screen. "In prison, she gets a bed, she gets food, she gets to play the victim. I want her to lose more than her freedom. I want her to lose her soul." "And Harrison?" Verity asked. "He chose his side," I said coldly. "He chose it twice. Now he can live with the consequences." I stood up and walked to the window. The snow had started to fall again, dusting the city in white. "Tomorrow is the dinner," I said. "The dinner where I reveal the truth to the world, and I need you to arrange the guest list." "Who are we inviting?" Verity asked. "Everyone," I said. "I want every person who betrayed me in that room. I want them to look me in the eye when I drop the guillotine." The legal trap had snapped shut. The rats were caught. Now, it was time for the slaughter. 72 hours after the FBI dragged Lorelei out of the foyer in handcuffs, she was sitting across from me at the dining table, wearing a red silk dress that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. It is amazing what $2 million in bail money and a judge with a gambling problem can achieve. Lorelei was out. Harrison was out. And they believed they were sitting down to negotiate a settlement. They thought this dinner was my surrender. They thought I had invited them, along with Sheriff Grady and the Omnicorp executives, to discuss a quiet payout to make the criminal charges disappear. They were wrong. This was not a negotiation. It was an autopsy of a living family. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, the spot my grandfather used to occupy. The room was dimly lit by the crystal chandelier that had been hastily repaired after the shootout with the hitman. The air was thick enough to choke on, smelling of roasted lamb and expensive fear. Behind my chair stood Verity. She was no longer Mrs. V, the wealthy widow. She was dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, her gray hair slicked back. Standing with her hands clasped behind her back like a royal guard, her eyes scanned the room, cataloging every twitch and bead of sweat. "This lamb is excellent, Kimberly," Lorelei said, slicing her meat with surgical precision. She didn't look at me. She looked at the knife in her hand. "Though I am surprised you kept the cook. I was planning to fire him next week." "I find he follows instructions well," I replied, taking a sip of water. "Unlike some people, he does not poison the people he feeds." Harrison dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the fine china. He looked terrible. The bruise on his cheek from where the hitman had struck him was turning a sickly shade of yellow. He reached for his wineglass with a trembling hand, draining it in one gulp. "Easy, Harrison," Sheriff Grady rumbled from the side of the table. The sheriff was sweating profusely, his uniform straining at the buttons. He kept glancing at the doors, where two of my private security guards stood like statues. "We are all friends here. Let us just get to the business, shall we? You said you had a proposal to drop the charges." "I do have a proposal," I said, setting my glass down. "But first, I want to tell you a story." "We do not have time for stories," Pierce snapped. He was sitting next to his mother, looking like a ghost. He hadn't touched his food. He kept checking his phone, but I had jammed the signal in the dining room. No one was calling for help tonight. "Make time, Pierce," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "It is a good story. It is about a little girl and a birthday trip." I pressed a button on a small remote concealed in my hand. The heavy velvet curtains at the end of the room parted, and a large projection screen descended from the ceiling. "Once upon a time," I narrated, keeping my eyes locked on Lorelei. "There was a wicked stepmother who wanted a kingdom, but there was a princess standing in her way. So she took the princess to a mountain of ice." The projector flickered to life. The room gasped. It wasn't a movie. It was raw, high-definition footage taken from a high altitude. "Recognize the angle, Pierce?" I asked softly. On the screen, a white Range Rover sat parked on a lonely logging road surrounded by snow. A figure, me, was dragged out of the back seat and thrown into the snow like a sack of trash. Then, the car drove away. But the video didn't end there. It switched to a thermal imaging mode. The landscape turned dark blue, and in the center of the ravine, a single, small red heat signature glowed. It was the girl. She was crawling. "You recorded it," I whispered to Pierce. "You sat in the warmth of the lodge, flying your drone, watching me freeze. You wanted a souvenir." Pierce stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "Turn it off. That is fake. That is AI. It is metadata tagged with your device ID. Pierce," Verity spoke up, her voice cutting through the panic. "I pulled it from your private cloud account, the one you thought you had deleted." "I am leaving," Pierce stammered. He scrambled away from the table, heading for the double doors. He didn't make it 3 steps. The security guards stepped forward, blocking his path with crossed arms. They didn't say a word. They just looked at him with the indifference of stone walls. "Sit down, Pierce," I commanded. "We haven't reached the climax yet." Pierce looked at the guards, then at his mother. He slumped back into his chair, putting his head in his hands. Lorelei slammed her hand on the table. The wine glasses jumped. "This is entrapment," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You hacked my son's private property. That footage is inadmissible in court. Any lawyer worth his salt will have it thrown out." "Maybe," I admitted, "but the jury of public opinion does not care about admissibility, and neither does the board of directors. Omnicorp pulled out of the merger 10 minutes ago. Lorelei, I sent them this video before dinner started." Lorelei's face went white. The money, the power, it was evaporating before her eyes. "You bitch," she hissed. "You ungrateful little brat." "I am not done," I said. "Verity, play the audio." Verity pulled a small recorder from her pocket and placed it in the center of the table. Static crackled, and then a voice filled the room. It was Harrison's voice, weak, fearful, and distinct. "She knows, Lorelei. She knows about the gambling debts." Then Lorelei's voice, sharp and cold. "Calm down, you fool." "I can't. She is going to talk. She is going to tell them you poisoned her mother. She knows about the foxglove tea." The silence that followed the recording was heavier than the blizzard had been. I looked at Harrison. He was staring at the tablecloth, tears streaming silently down his face. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. "You knew," I said to him. My voice wasn't angry anymore. It was just tiring. "You knew she killed Mom, and you married her anyway. You let her raise me. You let her drive me up that mountain." "I was afraid," Harrison whispered. "She threatened to ruin me." "You are already ruined, Dad," I said. Sheriff Grady stood up, his face a mask of false authority. He placed a hand on his holster. "All right, that is enough," Grady barked. "Miss Wainwright, I am going to have to ask you to turn over that recording. Illegal wiretapping is a felony in this state. I am placing you under arrest for—" "Sit down, Sheriff," a voice called out from the shadows near the kitchen entrance. A man stepped into the light. He wasn't a waiter. He was wearing a windbreaker with a badge clipped to his belt. I had introduced him earlier as a consultant from Omnicorp, but that had been a lie. "Special Agent Miller, FBI," the man said, holding up his badge. "We have been monitoring this dinner via a warrant authorized by a federal judge this morning. Sheriff Grady, you are under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accepting bribes across state lines." Grady froze. He looked at the FBI agent, then at the exits. 2 more agents stepped out from the kitchen. The trap was watertight. "It is over. Lorelei," I said, turning back to my stepmother. "The accounts are frozen. The company is mine. The sheriff is going to prison. And you are going to die in a cell." Lorelei looked around the room. Her eyes were wide, frantic, darting from the FBI agents to the security guards to me. The mask of the sophisticated socialite finally cracked, revealing the cornered animal underneath. She let out a guttural scream of rage. "No," she shrieked. "I will not. I built this family. I fixed this family." She reached into her purse. "Gun!" Verity shouted, lunging forward. But Lorelei was faster. She pulled out the pearl-handled revolver, the one she had used to shoot the chandelier. She didn't aim at the agents. She didn't aim at Verity. She aimed straight at me. The barrel looked like a black tunnel leading to hell. "If I am going to hell," Lorelei snarled, her finger tightening on the trigger, "I am taking you with me." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her. In that second, time seemed to stretch out. I saw the madness in her eyes. I saw the end of everything. "Lorelei, no." It wasn't Pierce. It wasn't the FBI. It was Harrison. My father, the coward, the man who had spent 20 years hiding in a bottle, the man who had signed my death warrant. He lunged across the table. He didn't look heroic. He looked clumsy and desperate, knocking over candles and wine bottles. He threw his body toward Lorelei, grabbing for the gun. "Don't do it!" Harrison screamed. Lorelei turned the gun toward him, startled by his sudden movement. Bang! The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. It wasn't the cinematic pop of movies. It was a thunderclap that rattled the teeth. Harrison jerked back as if he had been punched by an invisible giant. He stumbled, his hands clutching his stomach. Blood, dark and thick, began to seep through his fingers, staining his white shirt crimson. He looked at Lorelei with a confused expression. "Lorelei?" Lorelei dropped the gun. It hit the floor with a dull thud. She stared at her hands, then at her husband collapsing onto the rug. "Harrison?" she whispered. The FBI agents swarmed. They tackled Lorelei to the ground, pinning her arms behind her back. She didn't fight them this time. She just kept screaming Harrison's name over and over again. I stood up and walked around the table. The chaos swirled around me, shouting agents, Pierce sobbing in the corner, Grady being handcuffed. I ignored it all. I knelt beside my father. He was lying on his back, his breath coming in shallow. Wet rasps. The bullet had hit him in the gut. It was a bad wound. He looked up at me. His eyes were glazing over. But he saw me. "Kimmy," he wheezed. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "I am here, Dad," I said. I didn't hold his hand. I couldn't bring myself to touch him. "I didn't," he gasped, coughing. "I didn't want you to die." "I know," I said softly. "You just wanted to live. It is not the same thing." "I'm sorry," he whispered. The light was fading from his eyes. "Tell your mother." I tried. "No, Dad," I said, my voice cold and steady. "You didn't try. You watched." He closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, becoming erratic. Paramedics burst into the room, pushing me aside. They started working on him, shouting numbers and medical terms. I stood up and stepped back. Verity was at my side instantly, handing me a napkin to wipe a speck of blood from my cheek. "Is it done?" I asked her. Verity looked at Lorelei being dragged away, screaming curses at the ceiling. She looked at Pierce, curled into a ball on the floor. She looked at Harrison, bleeding out on the Persian rug. "The dinner is served," Verity said, "and they have cleaned their plates." I walked to the window and looked out at the night. The snow was falling harder now, covering the driveway, covering the world. It looked clean. It looked peaceful. Behind me, the empire of the Wainwright family was burning to ash, and I was the only one left holding a match. The deafening crack of the revolver did not result in a body dropping to the floor, but rather the shattering of a legacy. The bullet missed its intended target, my heart, by less than 2 inches. Instead, it tore through the shoulder padding of my gray suit, searing a line of fire across my skin like a branding iron, before burying itself in the heavy oil painting hanging on the wall behind me. I did not scream. I did not duck. I simply turned my head to look at the damage. The portrait of my grandfather, the founder of Wainwright Pharmaceuticals, now had a jagged hole right through his chest. The glass protecting the canvas had spiderwebbed outward, distorting his stern face into a fractured mosaic. "Missed," I said, my voice cutting through the ringing silence. Chaos erupted. The room, which had been frozen in a tableau of tension, suddenly exploded into violence. 3 FBI agents tackled Lorelei before she could cock the hammer for a second shot. She fought them with the hysterical strength of a woman watching her life disintegrate. She clawed, bit, and screamed obscenities that would have made a sailor blush, her elegant red dress tearing at the seams as she was slammed face first onto the Persian rug. "Get off me!" she shrieked, her face pressed against the wool. "I am Lorelei Wainwright. I own this city. You cannot touch me." "You have the right to remain silent," Special Agent Miller barked, engaging the handcuffs with a metallic click that sounded sweeter than any symphony, "though I highly suggest you start using it." Across the room, Harrison was not bleeding out on the floor as I had momentarily hallucinated in the adrenaline spike. He had been knocked backward by the rush of agents. Crashing into the sideboard, now, 2 officers were hauling him to his feet. He wasn't fighting. He was collapsing. His legs were jelly, his face a mask of absolute terror. "Kimmy!" he wailed, struggling against the grip of the agents. "Kimmy, tell them! I tried to stop her. I lunged for the gun. I saved you." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had sat in the car while I was dragged into the snow. I looked at the man who had signed the papers declaring me dead because he was too afraid to stand up to his wife. I felt the warm trickle of blood soaking into my shirt sleeve from the graze on my shoulder. It stung, sharp and hot, but I pushed the pain into a small box in the back of my mind and locked it. "You didn't save me, Dad," I said, my voice devoid of any fluctuation. "You just realized too late that you were betting on the losing horse." "Please," he screamed, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat and snot. "I am your father. Do not let them take me. I am an old man. I will die there." I watched them drag him out the double doors. He kicked and screamed like a toddler having a tantrum, stripping away the last shreds of his dignity. When the doors closed, silencing his pleas, I felt nothing, no pity, no sadness, just clinical satisfaction, like watching a tumor being excised from a healthy body. "Are you okay?" Verity was at my side, holding a clean napkin against my shoulder. Her face was grim. "That was too close." "It was perfect," I corrected, wincing slightly as she applied pressure. Attempted murder of a federal witness in front of 20 federal agents. She just handed the prosecutor a life sentence on a silver platter. "Your shoulder," Verity worried. "It is just a scratch," I said, pulling away. "We have work to do. The market opens in 6 hours." By the time the sun rose over North Dakota, the name Wainwright was trending on every social media platform on the planet, but not for the reasons Lorelei had hoped. The video of my abandonment in the snow had gone viral. It had been viewed 40 million times in 8 hours. The audio of Harrison admitting to the poisoning was playing on loop on the national news networks. The reaction was nuclear. At 9:30 in the morning, when the opening bell rang on the New York Stock Exchange, Wainwright Pharmaceuticals stock didn't just drop. It plummeted. It freefalls. Panic selling set in instantly. Investors were terrified of the fraud, the murder charges, and the impending federal seizure of assets. The stock lost 60% of its value in the first 45 minutes of trading. In the war room at the penthouse, Verity and I watched the red arrows rain down on the monitors. 65% down, Verity read the ticker. "It is a bloodbath." "It is a fire sale," I said, typing furiously on my laptop. 3 days ago, using the liquidity from the frozen Cayman accounts that I had secretly diverted, I had placed a massive short position against my own company. I had bet everything that the stock would crash. "Close the position," I ordered. Verity hit the enter key. We bought back the stock at pennies on the dollar. The profit from the short sale was astronomical. We had made nearly $200 million in profit in less than an hour, capitalizing on the destruction of my father's reputation. But I wasn't done. "Now," I said, watching the price bottom out. "Buy it back. All of it." "All of it?" Verity asked, raising an eyebrow. "We are buying the controlling interest," I said. "I am taking the company private. No more board of directors. No more shareholders. Just me." With the massive influx of cash from the short sale, we swept up the remaining shares for a fraction of their true value. By noon, I wasn't just the heir to Wainwright Pharmaceuticals. I was the sole owner. I had burned the village down to kill the rats, and now I was buying the land for free. While I was conquering the market, the legal system was dismantling my family. The bail hearing for Lorelei was held at 2 o'clock. I didn't attend, but I sent Mr. Sterling. He reported back that it was the shortest hearing in the county's history. The judge, having seen the video of Lorelei firing a gun at a victim in a room full of FBI agents, denied bail immediately. She was deemed a flight risk and a danger to the community. She was remanded to the maximum security wing of the state penitentiary pending trial. Pierce, however, did not have his mother's backbone. He lasted exactly 20 minutes in the interrogation room before he folded. I read the transcript later. It was pathetic. Detective: Did you pilot the drone? Pierce: She made me do it. Mom made me. She said if I didn't help her, she would cut off my allowance. I am a victim here. Detective: Did you put the sedative in the tea? Pierce: She brewed it. I just handed it to her. I didn't know it was lethal. I thought it was just sleeping pills. You have to give me a deal. I can tell you where she hides the diamonds. I can tell you about the offshore accounts. He sold his mother out for a promise of a reduced sentence. He poured every dirty secret, every hidden transaction, every moment of Lorelei's villainy onto the table. Desperate to save his own skin, he didn't care about family. He cared about avoiding prison time. Ironically, his cowardice was useful. His testimony provided the final nails in Lorelei's coffin. 2 days later, I went to see her. The visitor center at the county jail was a stark contrast to the velvet-draped dining room where we had last met. It smelled of bleach and despair. I sat on a metal stool on one side of the thick plexiglass partition. Lorelei was brought in. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit that washed out her complexion. Her hair was unwashed, hanging in greasy strings around her face. Without her makeup, without her jewelry, without her power. She looked old. She looked ordinary. She sat down and picked up the phone receiver. She stared at me with eyes that were burning with a cold, hard hate. "You look well," she said, her voice tinny through the speaker. "My shoulder is healing," I said, touching the bandage under my blouse. "The doctor says it will leave a scar. I think I will keep it. It is a good reminder." "You came to gloat," Lorelei said. "Go ahead. Enjoy it. But know this. Kimberly, you are just like me. Look at what you did. The short selling, the entrapment, the manipulation. You didn't defeat me by being better than me. You defeated me by becoming me." I leaned forward, resting my hand on the glass. "No, Lorelei," I said calmly. "You did it for greed. I did it for survival. There is a difference." "Is there?" she sneered. "Harrison is in the infirmary. He had a heart attack last night. Did you know that?" "I heard," I said. I felt a twinge of something in my chest, but I suppressed it. "He is receiving the best care the prison system can provide." "He is dying," Lorelei spat. "And you put him there." "He put himself there when he chose you over my mother," I replied. "And when he chose you over me." I stood up. I had said what I needed to say. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her anger. I just needed to see her in a cage. "Where are you going?" she demanded, slamming her hand against the glass. "We are not done. I made you strong. I toughened you up. You would still be a pathetic little girl crying for her daddy if it wasn't for me." I stopped and turned back. "You are right," I said. "You taught me that the world is cruel. You taught me that family is a liability. You taught me to be cold." I looked her dead in the eye, my gray contact lenses glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. "I graduated," I said. I hung up the phone and walked away, leaving her screaming silently behind the glass. The final act of the purge took place the following Monday at the corporate headquarters. I called an all-hands meeting in the atrium. Hundreds of employees gathered, whispering nervously. They expected layoffs. They expected the company to fold. I walked onto the stage, but I wasn't alone. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, Wainwright Pharmaceuticals has been sick for a long time. The leadership was corrupt, the values were rotted, but the infection has been removed. I gestured to the woman standing beside me. She was wearing a cream-colored business suit, her hair styled in a chic silver bob. She looked regal. She looked powerful. I would like to introduce you to your new Chief Financial Officer and Senior Strategic Advisor, I announced. Ms. Veronica Miller. A murmur went through the crowd. The older employees remembered her. They remembered the scandal 20 years ago. Ms. Miller was the victim of a frame-up orchestrated by the former administration. I continued. She was innocent. She has been exonerated, and she is the only person I trust to help me rebuild this company from the ground up. Verity stepped forward. She didn't smile. She just nodded. It was the nod of a general returning to the battlefield after a long exile. We have a lot of work to do, Verity said into the mic. Let us get to it. Later that afternoon, the asset forfeiture team arrived at the estate. Because Harrison and Lorelei had used company funds to pay for their lifestyle, the cars, the jewelry, the art, the renovations, it was all considered proceeds of crime under federal RICO statutes. Everything was subject to seizure to pay back the restitution owed to the company. I stood on the front lawn and watched as the movers carried out the furniture. I saw Lorelei's collection of furs being tossed into a box. I saw the painting of Harrison, the one without the bullet hole, being loaded into a van. I saw Pierce's gaming setup, his sneaker collection, his drone cases, all of it confiscated. Are you going to keep the house? Verity asked, standing beside me with a clipboard. I looked up at the mansion. It was a beautiful structure, stone and ivy, sitting high on the hill. But it was haunted. Every room held a memory of betrayal. Every hallway echoed with Lorelei's heels and Harrison's drunken stumbling. No, I said. It is poisoned. We can sell it, Verity suggested. The market value is around $15 million. No, I said again. I don't want the money, and I don't want anyone else living in their filth. I turned to the foreman of the demolition crew I had hired, who was waiting patiently by his bulldozer. When can you start? I asked. The man looked at the massive house, then at me. You want to demo the whole thing, Miss Wainwright? It is a perfectly good house. It is a monument to a lie, I said. I want it flat. I want the foundation dug up. I want the earth salted. And then I want you to plant pine trees, thousands of them. We can start immediately, the foreman shrugged. Do it, I said. I turned my back on the house. Behind me, the roar of the diesel engine started up. The sound of crunching stone and shattering glass filled the air. I walked toward Verity's truck. So, Verity said, opening the door. The king is dead. The queen is in the dungeon. The prince is a snitch, and the princess burned the castle down. The princess is dead. Verity, I said, climbing into the passenger seat. I looked at her, my eyes clear and dry. Long live the queen. We drove away as the first wall of the Wainwright estate crumbled into dust, leaving nothing behind but the cold, white snow. Winter returned to North Dakota exactly 6 months after the trial, arriving not with a whisper, but with the same howling fury that had nearly claimed my life 1 year ago. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my new office on the 45th floor of the Wainwright Spire. From this height, the people on the streets below were nothing more than ants scurrying for shelter. Oblivious to the girl who watched them from the clouds, the glass was cold against my forehead, but inside, the climate was perfectly controlled. Smelling of fresh lilies and the crisp scent of ozone from the air purifiers. Today was my 19th birthday. There was no party this year. There were no fake friends drinking my father's champagne, no stepmother plotting my murder while cutting the cake, and no stepbrother spiking my drink. There was just silence, a heavy golden silence that I had bought with blood and ink. I looked out toward the distant horizon, toward the silhouette of the mountains. The old Wainwright estate was gone. The week after I took full control of the company, I had ordered the demolition. It had taken the crews 3 weeks to tear down the stone walls, the grand staircase, and the master bedroom where Harrison had hidden from his sins. I did not sell the land. Instead, I hired a team of conservationists. We tore up the foundations, removed the manicured lawns, and planted 10,000 pine saplings. Nature had reclaimed the scene of the crime. In 20 years, there would be no trace that a house of lies had ever stood there, just a dense, dark forest, guarding its secrets in the snow. "The board meeting minutes are ready for your review," a voice said from the doorway. I turned. Verity stood there. She looked different now. The rags were gone, replaced by a tailored navy suit that screamed authority. Her hair was cut in a sharp, professional style, and she wore a pair of rimless glasses. But the eyes were the same, sharp, dangerous, loyal. "Thank you, Verity," I said. "How are the numbers?" "Solid," she replied, walking over to place a tablet on my desk. "The restructuring is complete. We have divested all the shell companies Lorelei set up. The new transparency protocols have restored investor confidence. The stock is up 15% this quarter." She paused, looking at me. "Happy birthday, Kimberly." "Thank you," I said softly. "Security just buzzed up," Verity said, her tone shifting slightly. It became guarded. "You have visitors in the lobby." I frowned. I didn't authorize any visitors. I told the front desk I was unavailable. "They said you would want to see these two," Verity said. "They said it is family." I felt a cold ripple move through my chest, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, anticipation. "Let them in," I said, "but do not bring them up here. Have security escort them to the courtyard entrance. I will meet them at the glass wall." I took the elevator down to the lobby level, but I stayed behind the secure perimeter. The new headquarters was designed like a fortress. A wall of bulletproof glass separated the private corporate entrance from the public plaza outside. I stood there, my hands clasped behind my back, waiting. Outside, the snow was falling heavily. The wind whipped around the corners of the building, biting at anyone foolish enough to be out in it. Then, I saw them. They looked like refugees from a war I had already won. Pierce was pushing a wheelchair. He looked skeletal. His designer clothes were gone, replaced by a mismatch of thrift store items, a stained parka that was too big for him, ripped jeans, and boots that looked like they were falling apart. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow and darting around nervously. He had spent 6 months in county jail before his plea deal got him released on probation. But the experience had broken him. The arrogance was gone, scraped away by the reality of being a snitch in a cell block. In the wheelchair sat Harrison, my father. He had suffered a massive stroke 3 months into his sentence. The prison doctors had saved his life, barely, but the damage was permanent. The entire left side of his face drooped like melting wax. His left arm lay useless in his lap. He was wrapped in a thin gray blanket that offered little protection against the biting wind. Due to his condition and the overcrowding in the prison infirmary, he had been granted compassionate release yesterday. He was a free man, and he had absolutely nowhere to go. Pierce pushed the wheelchair up to the glass. They saw me standing there, warm and dry in my slate gray suit. Pierce let go of the chair and pressed his hands against the glass. He looked desperate. "Kimberly!" he shouted. The sound was muffled by the thick glass, but I could hear the panic. "Kimberly, please, open the door. It is freezing out here." I didn't move. I just watched them. Harrison looked up, his good eye focused on me, filling with tears. He tried to speak, but his mouth struggled to form the words. He slurred. "Please." I walked over to the wall panel and pressed the button for the external intercom. "State your business," I said. My voice was amplified by the speakers outside, booming over the wind like the voice of a god. "Kimberly, come on," Pierce pleaded, shivering violently. "We have nowhere to go. The house is gone. The accounts are seized. No one will hire me. They know who I am. We slept in a shelter last night, but they kicked us out this morning because Dad made a mess." "That sounds like a difficult situation," I said calmly. "We are family," Pierce screamed, banging his fist on the glass. "He is your father. Look at him. He is dying. You can't just leave us out here in the snow." Family. I repeated the word, tasting the irony. I seem to remember a different definition of family. I remember a family that drugs tea. I remember a family that drove away while an 18-year-old girl was dragged into a ravine. Pierce flinched. I told you, that was Mom. That was Lorelei. We are victims too. You are not victims, I said. You are accomplices who got caught. Harrison began to weep. It was a pathetic, gurgling sound. Love. You, he managed to choke out. Blood is thick. Blood freezes at the same temperature as water. Harrison, I said. I signaled to the security guard standing by the service door. He stepped out into the cold, holding a manila envelope. He walked over to Pierce and handed it to him, then quickly retreated back into the warmth. Pierce tore the envelope open. His hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped it. He pulled out the contents. It wasn't a check. It wasn't cash. It was a rusted iron key and a laminated map. Pierce looked at it, confused. What is this? A gift, I said through the intercom. It is my birthday, after all. But I decided to be generous. Harrison looked at the map. His good eye widened in recognition. He knew that location. He knew the winding logging roads that led up the mountain. The asset forfeiture team seized everything you owned, I explained, my voice steady and cold. The cars, the jewelry, the investments. But there was one piece of property that was so worthless, so dilapidated, that the government didn't even bother to auction it off. It was still in your name. Dad. I paused, letting the snow swirl around them. The old ranger station on Silver Peak, I said. The one near the ravine. Pierce looked at the key, then at me. Horror dawned on his face. No, he whispered. No, you can't be serious. It is a ruin. It has no electricity. It has no heat. It is miles from the nearest town. I bought the deed from the state this morning for $1. I continued. It is yours now. Legally, it is the only roof you have over your heads. I leaned closer to the glass. I had a crew go up there yesterday. I felt sentimental. I told them to leave a stack of firewood in the corner and a box of matches. It is more than you left me. Kimberly, please, Pierce screamed, tears freezing on his cheeks. We will die up there. The storm is coming. It is going to be 30 below zero tonight. I know, I said. I remember exactly what that feels like. The numbness, the hallucinating warmth, the desire to just close your eyes and sleep. I looked at Harrison. He wasn't crying anymore. He was staring at me with a look of pure, terrified understanding. He realized that this was not cruelty. This was balanced. This was the universe correcting itself. The roads are still open, I said, checking my watch. If you start walking now, you might make it before the sun goes down. But I would hurry. The forecast calls for a blizzard. You are a monster, Pierce shrieked, throwing his body against the bulletproof glass. No, Pierce, I said softly. I am just a businesswoman handling a liability. I released the intercom button. The sound of their screaming cut off instantly. I stood there for a moment longer. I watched as Pierce realized the futility of his tantrum. I watched as he looked at the map, then at the sky, which was turning a bruised shade of purple. I watched as he grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. He said something to Harrison. Harrison nodded weakly. Slowly, painfully, they turned away from the light of the tower. Pierce began to push the wheelchair through the accumulating snow, heading toward the street, heading toward the mountains. They looked small. They looked insignificant. Just two dark specks moving against a canvas of white, disappearing into the storm they had once summoned to kill me. Are you all right? I turned. Verity was standing beside me. She held 2 mugs of steaming tea. I am fine, I said. She handed me a mug. It is Earl Grey, she said with a faint smile. I checked the tin myself. No additives. I took the cup, feeling the heat seep into my cold fingers. I took a sip. It was warm, rich, and clean. They are going to the station, Verity said, looking out at the empty plaza. They might make it, I said. Or they might not. It is up to them now. It is up to their will to survive. Do you think they have it? Verity asked. Will? I don't know, I said. And for the first time in my life, I don't care. I turned my back to the window. I turned my back on the snow, on the mountains, and on the ghosts of the past that were trudging through the drifts. I looked at the lobby of my company. It was bright. It was warm. People were walking through the atrium, talking, laughing, living their lives. I had built this. I had saved it, and I was alive to see it. Let us go back up, I said to Verity. We have work to do. Happy birthday, Kimberly, Verity said again, clinking her mug against mine. Yes, I smiled. And it was a real smile, one that reached my eyes. It really is. We walked toward the elevators, leaving the storm outside where it belonged. For the first time, the cold didn't bite. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 10 years old. I felt warm. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this tale of betrayal and retribution, please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the Family Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.